Welcome to Muscular Minds Podcast, where we want to build mental toughness and resilience for you, your family, your faith, and your future. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, this is Jared Dane at Muscular Minds, and I don't know about you, but I'm hearing a lot about how men are in crisis. Men aren't showing up to be dads. They're not showing up to be husbands or in the workforce. I don't know if that's true. I know that when I left home, I had every intention of going to the workforce and being a husband and a father, but that may not be every man's goal. But like the problem is, if that's a lot of our goals as men, then how are we doing society? How are we doing in our culture? So I wanted to see what other men thought from all different generations. So we have 4 generations of men that are showing up, are getting it right as far as being fathers, husbands, parents, and they are also working hard, worked hard for many years. And I want to hear what it takes to show up, what kind of role models they had, what are some of the things they did, and they're going to give us some insight. So we're going to check that out. It's going to be a 2-part podcast. So make sure you subscribe so you can hear about that second one when it comes available. And if you want to see some of the pre-runners to this podcast, you can go to our website at muscularminds.com, and you can read about kind of how America's breakup with men. And I cite different resources about why men are in crisis in the first place and what do we need to be getting better. So check us out at muscularminds.com, and let's get this started with podcast number 1.
Your host, Jared Dane. We're glad to have you today on our podcast. As always, you can check us out at muscularminds.com. We also have other podcasts there, both video and audio, or you can look up some of our blogs. We also have a book on parenting if you want to check it out. School started back. It's a lot of work raising kids, so if you need some help, you can check that out as well. Today, our video podcast, we're really paying attention to men today of all ages. So if you have a kid, if you're a father, if you're a husband, a boyfriend, a friend, or if you're just a guy trying to figure out how to navigate, we've got guys from multiple generations here today. Some really solid men that I'm excited that we get to participate together today. And we're going to have like a battle of the generations, if you will, but not in any kind of way that I would say is adversarial, but we're excited to hear wisdom and just insights from all these guys. So I have got 3 guys besides myself, so representing other generations. We have Mr. Gerald Fox. Gerald Fox, there's a lot of lore surrounding Gerald. He's been an extra in movies. He knows a few movie stars. He flies planes. I'm not even sure everything that he does, but I feel like I could drop him in an island and he would be able to take care of himself, survivor style, and it would be fine. And then we also have Cody Weems, and he is a new father, right, to number 2, second child. So we're excited to have him here. Gainfully employed, working hard, married, just an overall amazing gentleman. And we also have Callahan Mitchell, senior at Texas A&M University. And he is, what are you studying, Callahan?
Journalism.
Journalism. All right.
Yes, sir.
All right, gentlemen. So to start us off, let's have a little round here where we just kind of go rapid fire. Let's do best in your generation. And let's start off with Code Man. Cody, what was the best toy for a guy growing up?
I don't know if a bike counts as a toy, but that was always like the one I was most excited for before I could drive.
10-speed, BMX?
Oh, yeah.
What are we talking?
I guess 10-speed, like mountain bike. But, before you have a car, when you're like, 8 to 14, 15, like that bike is your ticket to your friend's house or the park or whatever. So that was always the one I was most excited about growing up.
Okay. You sound a little Gen X with that one, because that's what
Yeah.
we did. We were outside running around the bikes. One exception, though, we did upgrade to the 10-speed when we were old enough. So
There
because
you
you
go.
could get twice as faster on that sucker. All right, Callahan, what about for you?
I think for me, it's probably BB guns. I'll just be in the backyard, clanking acorns, shooting stuff off trees, shot a couple birds. I think that was my go-to.
Nice. I love that. All right, Gerald. So you're older than the rest of us, but I bet you had the most fun. What were you playing with as a kid?
Well, they've already mentioned 2 of them, bicycle and BB gun. Those were big items. And another one was bow and arrow. We were really big into bows and arrows, sharper the point, the better, you know.
I feel like they took those away in the subsequent generations. I guess we
Uh,
got too many of us hurt ourselves with that one or something, but
You know, those they were dangerous. They were definitely dangerous, but you know, we would never ever consider turning a bow and arrow on one of our playmates.
well, I will say if we trusted kids with the bow and arrow, then there's a lot of trust that goes there. So for me and my generation, we did like toy guns, like were huge, and like action figures. Voltron was a huge thing. Thundercats, loved us some Thundercats. And so anything action figure related to those, that was a big deal. But Voltron was pretty big. Transformers, y'all, like Transformers, you could do the dinosaurs. They could go into vehicles, anything you wanted. So that was a big one too. All right, let's kind of go hobbies from your generation. What was a big hobby from your generation, Callahan? What about you? What were hobbies?
I think football. I think just like growing up, it was always two-hand touch in the backyard. And then once you got to high school, football practice every summer. And then, video games, playing football on video games, fantasy football. It was just kind of something that was always around.
Okay, I like that. Gerald, any hobbies when you were a young man?
Two things: coin collecting, especially rare coins, early American coins. I even had a couple of Roman coins, and stamp collecting. I tried stamp collecting for a while, but coin collecting was my thing.
Okay, I like that. I did baseball cards. That was a big one. I have like just years of baseball cards. I have Nolan Ryan's, so that was pretty cool. Garbage Pail Kids were a thing. I didn't really collect those, but I had a lot of friends that did. So, but apparently that was like, I guess the equivalent to now would be like Pokemon. Obviously, sports were obviously a big thing too, man. Football, baseball was a bigger deal, man. Everybody played outside and did baseball. That was huge. All right. Think about your culture growing up. Maybe if you're comfortable given the decade you grew up in, maybe we give kind of like think about that elementary, middle school decade. And so like role models and heroes. I'm going to go first. High school was the 90s. So kind of 80s and 90s for me. But for the 90s, I guess you could say we still really looked up to sports heroes. Bo Jackson was a guy, Michael Jordan. That was a big time deal. But everybody also was real patriotic. It really didn't matter who the president was. You were, everybody was kind of looked up to whoever the leader of the country was. But we did have sports figures were pretty good. Top Gun had come out in the 80s. And so Tom Cruise was a big deal. And he started doing his Mission Impossible movies in the 90s. So we all watched those. That was a big deal. Star Wars, obviously, you have to be aware of how to use the Force. So that was real. So that was all big. So what about you guys? Cody, why don't you get this one, man?
Yeah, I grew up in the kind of late 90s and into 2000s. So mine's similar. A lot of sports guy. I was a big baseball fan. So Craig Biggio was one of my favorites when I was real little. And then guys like Colt McCoy and Tim Tebow, that they were kind of that transition of guys who really lived out their faith through what they did. It wasn't like, because before there were guys that were like, they were athletes who were believers, and you kind of heard about it on the side, but these were guys who were like, they were believers who happened to play football. And so guys like that were real inspiring to me, like in my middle school, high school years.
Nice. I like that. Gerald, you got next. Then Callahan, why don't you finish this up?
Yes, sir.
Well, I'm not sure where you want to put me, but I began first grade 1949 and graduated from high school in 62. So I guess my big years were like in the late 50s, early 60s. So far as, are we talking about heroes?
Yeah, cultural icons, the people that people looked up to.
It'll probably sound hokey in a way, but back then TV was a new thing. So our heroes were people like Gene Autry and Roy Rogers. And of course, Gunsmoke started way back then. And so Matt Dillon played a huge role as a role model in a way.
What about the rifleman, Gerald? That's what I saw sometimes as a kid, the rifleman.
It came along a little later for me, but I was certainly familiar with that program. But at any rate, those guys, whether it be Humphrey Bogart or John Wayne, any of those guys, they always knew exactly what to do and whatever the situation was, and they always came out on top. And these days, that may not be the case in our entertainment, but we were taught some lifelong principles by those guys. I wrote down, in fact, something that Gene Autry often talked about, and that was the cowboy code. And it went like this: you always tell the truth, you be gentle with children and elderly and animals, keep your word, help people in distress, and be a patriot and respect the law. Now, those are the kinds of things that we were taught whenever we watch TV. How often do you hear that? So we had some good role models.
Yeah, I like that. It sounds like a little bit of the bend with the culture and the role models was kind of like shaping the values or the principles of the people that were watching the show. So that's interesting. I don't know that it's quite the same, or it's just different over the decades. But I appreciate that, Gerald. That's a really good perspective. Along those lines, we're talking about people that were in culture that others looked up to that were around us. Think about, I want to kind of shift to your dad. You know, not everybody has a great father figure situation. I don't know you guys well enough to know your dads, but think about maybe a positive quality in your father, something that you looked up to, or like, hey, I want to be like that, or I want to do that in my life too. So, Mr. Comfortable, let's talk about that for a second, because I feel like that's being a guy. Being a man is looking at the guy in front of you. What's the man like that's in front of you? And usually that's going to be your father, your uncle, maybe an older brother, and maybe a grandfather still. But we look to those men that are in front of us to know how we're supposed to behave. So Callahan, why don't you go first, man? Like, tell us what you looked up to maybe in your father or whoever raised you.
Yes, sir. Yeah, my dad was honestly an amazing dad. And it was really cool because this summer I actually interned for his company. And so like growing up, he always provided, he worked super hard. And I think early on that just like applied to me in sports. Like not trying hard was not really an option for me. Like, he'd make me run after practice if I didn't do well. And if I didn't play well in the games, he would make sure to tell me. But yeah, this summer I actually interned at his company, and my dad's like really high up in the company. And it was just like really, really cool because as a kid, like I always knew my dad worked really hard, but seeing him as kind of an adult, being like 21, he just worked really, really hard this summer, and just seeing how he's kind of a boss to people was something that's really cool. And just transitioning to adulthood, transitioning to a career, it was just something I definitely want to replicate.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah.
Cody, what about you and your dad?
Yeah, the thing I think about with my dad, and the thing I appreciate even more now that I'm a parent and chasing kids around, is I think just his work ethic. A lot of times he was working 6 days a week, and his day off would be Sunday. So he'd be, taking us to church and then helping his parents out around their house and throwing the ball around with us. And so it seems like, thinking back now, it seems like he rarely ever had a rest day, but we never heard that from him. He didn't complain. He worked hard, and he did what he needed to do at home and for others. And, so that's something that I can appreciate now that I have 2 kids of my own that I'm chasing around, just realizing like, man, he must have been exhausted, but he just kept doing it and kept showing up for us.
I like that. So I guess what I'm hearing so far is just hard work. And then I like the showing up. I mean, that's something that we don't always get things right as dads or husbands or men, but I like it just showing up. That's important. And so I like that. Gerald, what did you learn from the person who raised you?
Yeah, back during those days, fathers kept their kids at an arm's length. It was not really a close relationship like you observe these days, but it wasn't necessarily bad because I could observe qualities in my dad that were admirable. He was generous, and I admired his ability to cope with pain because he was in pain for many years, especially the latter years of his life. And he sensed that I was observing him one time when he was coping with pain. And he said something like, it's one thing to be in pain, and then it's another to complain about it. And that's a Stoic philosophy, really, but it's characteristic of the sort of person he was. He didn't put up with whiners and complainers, especially when there was still so much life to live and so many things to accomplish. In fact, he was in pain for probably the last 11 years of his life, but it was interesting enough. It was during those years that he was the most successful in his business. And I'm sure there's a relationship there. He was focused more on what he needed to accomplish rather than on his own pain.
I think that's pretty insightful and amazing, because I don't know that, that's something that most of us would understand, because I think a lot of times when somebody's in pain, we know about it, or we offer help, or they're getting support, but just kind of the pushing through things and not trying to accomplish hard things in spite of being in pain. That's pretty impressive. For me, with my dad, I was thinking about just the showing up was something that, Cody, I really noticed in my dad too. Also appreciated when there was a mistake or a mess up, that he would own that, right? He would apologize to my brother and I, and he's like, hey, I hadn't been a dad before, this is new. And, we'd give us a hug, and then we'd move on, and it was done with. But I just appreciated he wasn't prideful to the point where he couldn't acknowledge a mistake or something he had done wrong. And honesty was a big guys or liars. And, that's something that I always grew up with too, is like honesty was something that you just practiced. There wasn't another way to go at it, and be in relationship with him. Yep. Sounds like everybody here had great dads, whether it was just showing up, working hard, accomplishing things, even through pain, and then not looking to make excuses about that. We portray an older gentleman as someone who is weaker, doesn't maybe always have of the same prowess they did when they were young. And I think we overlook the experience, the expertise, the knowledge, and all that comes with age and experience. But I will say, from my perspective growing up, a lot of the older guys, man, I thought they were tough as nails. They had some worries. I'm like, dude, I don't want to mess with that guy. And just like this old man strength, maybe they're just inked up, tatted up, and I'm like, I'm not going to mess with this guy. But they were just tough dudes who knew what they were doing forwards and backwards. And so I think it was probably a healthy respect for a lot of those guys. I don't know. Stereotypes for you guys. What did y'all think when you think of older gentlemen? What kind of stereotypes did you have when you were a kid?
Yeah, I think I kind of had the same thought as you, Jared, that, you looking at guys a generation or two older than you, and it's like, oh man, they got it all together. And I think that's something I still fall into. When I was in my teens, looking at guys in my 20s, I thought they had all the answers. And then when I got into my 20s, I was like, oh, those guys didn't know anything. And so, it's kind of like looking at the generations that have come before you, and you're like, now that guy, when I get to that point, I'm gonna have everything together like he does. But, we're all just kind of going along and learning as we go. But I've definitely
winging it.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'm definitely falling into that trap of like, he knows what he's doing when, maybe he does, maybe he doesn't, but we're all just kind of living life.
Yeah. All right. What about you, Callahan?
Yeah, I think my generation, honestly, is just where there was like a lot of loss of respect for like older people. Like for me, like my dad always built into me, to respect your elders. And, I had great grandparents. And so I really respected them. But I think just for a lot of people, kind of what's portrayed on the internet and TV, since just like living in such a technological age, it's like, oh, like older people don't know how to work all this new technology. They don't really know what's going on in the world. And I think there is a significant kind of drop off in respect with a lot of people my age for older people.
Yeah. And I would say I probably had that a little bit too when I was probably in my 20s. I think it changes once you start becoming a little older. You're like,
yeah.
You realize, oh, yeah, because you assume once you're in your 30s or 40s or 50s, like you're going to I'm going to do it better. I have it all together. And you realize it's a lot harder to carry the load of being in charge, whether you're dad or husband or the boss at work or you own your company or whatever it is. Those challenges are a lot more difficult. And to me, it kind of flips. And you have a healthy respect of the people that were in front of you. You're like, man, I don't know how they did that.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, Callahan. Gerald, what about you? I know you are the elderly gentleman in the group, but we are glad you're here. But what did you think when you were a kid about older folks?
Well, I'm glad I'm still here too. But when I think um, what I thought of older folks when I was young, it probably fell into more than one category. You had the older people that you saw in the movies or on TV who, to a degree, served as role models. Even Tarzan, Tarzan was a big stuff when I was growing up, and he was a role model because he always knew what to do, and he was always on some big adventure that always turned out right. And it was really meaningful for me because in our backyard or behind our backyard was this gigantic vacant lot, which was a virtual jungle with grapevines you could swing from and everything while giving Tarzan yells. So yeah, Tarzan was a big thing when I went. But then you had the older men in real life, like the president and the governor and of course my father, and they tended to have a more stern sort of personality, and they call the shots, and we younger people towed the line or else. And so there was a disciplined atmosphere when it came to real life. And then we went to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. So biblical figures were also role models. Noah, Moses, Joseph, David, all of those guys who made it on to the role of men of faith in Hebrews 11. And so we were quite aware of those individuals, and they served as role models for us too. I know we're talking about stereotypes, but these guys always were the epitome of what you ought to be. So I'll give you a little insight into my background.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think what I kind of got from that is whether you knew the answers or had all the answers, if you were in those positions of leadership, you kind of didn't give that away. You kind of like were the buck stops with you, so to speak, as an older person. And it was to give probably the confidence too that the younger generations could feel confident following them in leadership. But I appreciate that, Gerald. I think that's insightful. All right. So as we kind of talked a little bit before we hopped on here, we talked a little bit about just a lot of younger men are struggling to connect into families, to step into the workforce. It's taking longer and longer, or they're falling out of those jobs quicker and quicker for a variety of reasons. And I'm not even sure everybody knows all of the ins and outs about that. But I think it's a good, like, you guys are all working hard, accomplished, doing things, have done things, whether it's being a husband and father or working a long time or college or just being the guy in charge. You guys have done all of those things in your lives between y'all. And so I just want to hear, let's kind of share some wisdom with the group. Like, if we're thinking about generationally speaking, what's something you would offer, I guess, folks that are maybe struggling, men specifically, that are struggling to find their place, to get settled, to kind of find their bearings? What advice would you tell a young man? What would you share with them that might help them make a difference or get started or man up, so to speak, kind of get involved? What would you say? And Jeff, we're going to save you for last because I feel like you've earned that spot more than the rest of us. But Cody, why don't we go you and then Callahan, and then we'll go to.
In my experience in my adult life and just kind of what I observe from people around me, there's this kind of defeatist mindset of, I hear a lot from people in my generation, like it's impossible to buy a house. It's impossible to do this or that, or to get ahead financially or in your career. So I think a lot of people just are seeing that and hearing that message and aren't willing to try. And, are things hard? Yes. But, you're never going to know if they're impossible or not if you don't put yourself out there and try. So there's just kind of this culture of, the system is made for us to not be able to succeed. So we're not going to try. And whether or not that's actually the way it is, or whether or not that's just kind of a narrative that has been crafted. People hear that and hear it perpetuated, and and it starts to take root in people's brains. And so I think that's a lot of what you see now of people not advancing in their careers and not settling down, starting families, because they've just been told so much that it's impossible. And is it hard? Yes, but are these things worth putting the work in? Also, yes. So, but yeah, I just think that we need a culture shift of and kind of a mindset change to break some of those things that have been ingrained in our culture over these last, I don't know, decade or so.
I like that.
Thanks for joining Muscular Minds today, where strength isn't measured by how much you lift, but who you lift up. And that starts with you.